All right, Jason. Jason, where'd you grow up? Where are you from originally?
Long Island, New York. Yeah, grew up in Long Island. Worked in Brooklyn my whole career.
What was your childhood like growing up?
My childhood was great. Uh, my parents still together, loving family. Two brothers, middle child. Just a good childhood.
That's great. Um, what kind of teenager were you?
Depends on who you ask. If you ask my mother, she'll tell you I was a typical middle child. But I like to say I was a good kid. I got into trouble, but nothing serious. I was a pain in the butt to my parents.
Yeah.
But
What made you want to go towards a job in law enforcement?
first cop in my family. Plenty of military. My dad is an Army veteran. Uncle's a Navy veteran. Nobody served as a cop or a first responder, at least that I'm aware of on both sides. But it was just like the military, just in service of something greater than yourself, other people, and I just gravitated towards that while in the military, and I took the police exam while I was still serving. I was deployed at the time. They called my name. They put me on a deferment list, and soon after getting out of the military, I started the police department.
And that was right around 9/11, right?
Yeah, so I started on July 2nd, 2001. It was, I believe, my first day. And then about a little over a month after that, yes, 9/11 happened. I was still a recruit in the police academy.
Wow. How did that change your life?
How did that change my life? Well, you asked the right question. It definitely changed my life. It didn't just change my career. Not knowing it at the time, it sounds weird to say, but I'm kind of glad that I was on the job when that happened. Of course, would have rathered it not, but I'm grateful that I was there during that time because I think it created who I am today. Maybe I was in the city a few times as a child on school trips. I had never really explored New York. I was a Long Island kid, but having that as kind of my introduction to the city and the police department was pretty crazy. I mean, they pulled us out. I was in law class, and I read about it in my book, and we thought it was training exercise. And we soon found out that it wasn't. And I believe it was about a month or so we were out. They realized real quick that we were the cheapest police force labor was the recruits. So they pulled us out for that. I think they had pulled us out for two other things following 9/11. So my academy was about 9 months long. But it definitely, to answer your question, it definitely changed my life. It definitely went down before I came back up. And came back up right as I was exiting the police department. Fortunately,
You worked as a cop for how long?
just shy of 20 years, and just shy because of pension stuff. I actually had my three military years gave me over 20 pension wise, but I left right before 9/11, right before my 20 because I was actually losing money by staying in how my pension worked. So I used my military time to get me over that 20. So I retired a few months before my 20.
Can you tell me a little bit about your experience with 9/11 and what you guys were going through?
Yeah, so like I said, we were in law class, and our academy instructor told us he stay in the classroom. He was going out to the hallway to talk to other instructors, and we heard commotion outside. He soon returned and said, there's been a terrorist attack, and we're all being mobilized down to the auditorium. I said, sure, it's a terrorist attack. We're in the academy. Why would we not think that it's a training exercise? We got to the auditorium, and I could tell you, I thought right away, this can't be a training exercise. There's way too many people there. It looked way too official. And I'll never forget, one of the first things that I can remember them saying was that all women and any of us with kids just to hang out, everybody else muster out into the hallway, which quickly changed to everybody. I saw people quit right on the spot. One female officer from my class said it was this is too much. So they deployed us. We went out in our recruit uniforms, our gray uniforms. I believe all I had was a baton. I didn't have a firearm. We didn't have, maybe we had handcuffs. Certainly didn't know how to use them at that point yet. A month into the academy. And we had our first job was traffic enforcement. I was down on by the 34th Street entrance to the Midtown Tunnel, and people were happy to remind us that we weren't real cops yet, which is obviously why they sent us out with the instructors to basically babysit us. Went out multiple times after that. One in particular that I talk about is I'll never forget. They had MTA city buses that they had bringing us from the academy down to the various locations throughout the city. And on one day, my female partner at the time was with me, and they told us to, get on the bus, and it was going to take us down to Ground Zero and to find the highest ranking officer that was there, let them know we were from the academy, which was evident that we were. And we did that, and we found ourselves standing in front of One Liberty Plaza. And it was adjacent to what used to be a Burger King. And the Burger King's windows were all blown out. And it was turned into a makeshift dispensary for personal protective equipment. So, hats and masks, helmets, masks, and whatnot. And somebody yells that the building's coming down. It was windy, and there was glass falling, and we all start running. And that morning, I had broken my baton holder. So I had wrapped the end string around my gun belt, my gunless gun belt. And we all start running. And as I was running, the baton would hit my leg and fly back up and smack me in the face. It looked like I had been in a fight. We stopped running because by that time, the building would have clearly have come down. And if it had, we were certainly far enough away. It did not come down. It was the glass that was falling. And that was I think day 3. And that was in my mind, this many years later, my introduction to the police world. What stands out to me with all the things that I had experienced in the academy and during 9/11 is that there was no debrief after that. There was no, we're kids. We were essentially children with authority now, and experiencing things that we had never been taught. Right, grief, trauma, moral injury, and it was next day. No debrief about how to, we just experienced some crazy stuff, we saw some difficult things. There was no talking about it. And that's how my career began. And unfortunately, that's how way too many officers' careers begin. And it's never talked about, the things they experience and see, and that builds and builds and builds until we're losing our officers to suicide, and families are being destroyed, and relationships are being ruined. And that's what kind of transitioned me towards the latter part of my career into the behavioral health space, and seeing way too many folks die by suicide, die by their own hands, more so than at the hands of, perps. Criminals. And I was unhappy for way too long. I had way too much turmoil personally, and having come out better for it on the other side, I didn't want to see anyone else unnecessarily have to go through it. So that's what, kind of led me down my next life's journey.
Outside of 9/11, which was certainly a big event, tell me about the reality of being a cop in New York City.
It's in the academy, it told us you have the greatest seat in the world, greatest show on earth, and it's true. I saw any and everything. I was exposed to. Again, I was a sheltered child. Living in Long Island, growing up a Catholic school altar boy. Not till I went to the military did I really experience different cultures, different religions, different people from all over the states. And then I get to the city as a cop, and it's a melting pot. I mean, there's everybody there. And it was truly, there's a lot I would never want to repeat. But again, like 9/11, I'm fortunate to have experienced it because it molded me into the man I am today, the father, the husband. But I spent a lot of time as a patrol officer, and then quickly transitioned to detective bureau. So I spent the majority of my career as a detective.
As a detective, what kind of things do you see? What kind of cases do you see? You were working in Manhattan?
So as a detective, I worked in cold case homicide. So we had the whole city. I was assigned to a Brooklyn office. So generally my cases were Brooklyn cases, but I had cases from every borough. And cold cases are unsolved homicides, right? All homicides. They could be a few years old. They could be 20 years old and on. There's no statute of limitation for murder. So we had very old cases, some new cases. I never wanted to work in sex crimes. I never wanted to work with child homicides, but the way it worked out, most of my homicides were of young teenagers. So I wound up working in an area that I wasn't looking to work in. I wanted to work homicides, but I didn't want to work homicides with children, and unfortunately, that's where I ended up. It took me all over domestically. It took me internationally, but it was some of the most toughest. They were some of the most toughest cases I worked, and what kind of really caused a lot of the turmoil in my life. But again, I wouldn't trade it. It was some of the best work that I've been a part of. I worked with some of the, in my opinion, the greatest investigators there are, and I look back on it fondly. But I do look back on it with appreciation that some of those tough times are what brought me to where I am today.
Do you find being a cop was a rewarding career?
Without question, it was a rewarding career. There were cases, there's one in particular where, I had called the victim's mom and told her that we had pretty much identified who murdered her son. And she asked me where exactly I was, and she said she was out shopping nearby in downtown Brooklyn, and she showed up at our office, and just getting a thank you from a parent for, you can't bring their child back, but giving them somewhat of a resolution to their years of turmoil and not knowing, you can't replace that with anything. I miss that. I miss the hunt. I miss the
adrenaline.
You said it right. We had cases where I was investigating a murder of a 19-year-old boy, a 16-year-old girl, which was on the heels of 17-year-old girl with my partner, which was on the heels of a 16-year-old girl, all brutally murdered. And those investigations had come to a close, and I remember the press conference in downtown Brooklyn, and us driving back to the command and feeling like, what's next? It was that constant every day where we were flying to, where we were traveling to, who we were interviewing, what we were doing, and it all came to a lull, and we got to get, what's next? And that's difficult. I know for me, and I know a lot of retirees, that adrenaline rush, that sense of purpose, that sense of belonging to a group of individuals all doing the same things and going through the same things that you're going through now comes to an abrupt halt. And finding that now after retirement, life as now a civilian, that can be very difficult. And that's where we find a lot of our Leos, our first responders, struggling pretty hard.
What are the most difficult parts of being either a street cop or a detective? It's not easy being a cop.
No, and you know what? I don't care what command you work in, what area. If you work in a slow command, a busy command. I worked in a slow command in the 84th Precinct in downtown Brooklyn, and we lost a lot of cops, right? And so anything can happen anywhere. But the first thing that comes to mind when you ask what's the hardest thing about, being on the job is not being with my family. And I don't mean physically, because I was more distant while physically present with them than I was not physically present with them, if that makes sense. And I think that was more damaging than when I was at work physically. Having dad home in his own world, I call it Isolation Island, and me not engaging, or I still struggle with that today. 4 years later, engaging and connecting. I still work on that. So that for me was the hardest thing. Is these cases needed that effort, and I would do it again, maybe a little differently, but it needed all of me, but so did my family. It's very difficult to navigate that path.
Is there PTSD that you experience as a cop?
I think every officer can probably say yes to that, and I would definitely say yes. We see a lot, and we see a lot firsthand, and we see a lot vicariously, right? I didn't just see the aftermath of a jumper, right? Or we would call him a jumper, somebody, that died by jumping off a building, or the victim of a crime, a shooting, a murder, right? We're also hearing those stories like dispatchers. I'm hearing a vivid account, a firsthand account, gruesome details. I'm looking at crime scene photos. We're looking at crime scene photos. We're looking at autopsy reports. We're picking at old wounds of a mom whose son was dismembered and disposed of like trash, constantly, over and over and over, and that builds up.
It takes a toll.
It takes a toll, and it doesn't just take a toll. It didn't just take a toll on me. It just doesn't take a toll on us as the investigator, as the officer. It takes a toll on the family as well. My wife would tell you that to be very true.
Are you still married?
How? I don't know. Yes, I am. She's a saint. She is very much a first responder, as much as I was. The spouses, the daughters, the sons, the family members of first responders are on the job just like we are. They're dealing with us coming home, us leaving, not knowing. I can't tell you how many times I called my wife from a hospital for whatever reason. I was there, and I never understood it at the time what she might have felt when she saw that number pop up, or the initial shock of not knowing why I was there, or not coming home, or not being able to call her right away because I was stuck on a job, and didn't understand or give thought to what that could have been doing to the folks at home. But yes, I am still married, and happily, I might add.
You have some interesting stories of some of the cases you worked on?
So many. I actually was in court for one of them recently, so there's a lot I can't talk about because I haven't seen trial yet, but one in particular which I'm happy to talk about, partly because the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, for lack of a better way to describe it, failed the family. This is a case of Rashan Brazelle. Rashan was a 19-year-old boy that was brutally murdered, dismembered, and strewn about throughout the city in different locations. That case was in 2005, if I'm not mistaken, and I got very close to the family, and it was a complicated case. It was investigated by an amazing detective before me, who was the one who introduced me to Mom. And I was looking at that case. I had an article in my desk pinned up that had I think it was like the 10 or 8 most notorious unsolved homicides for the city of New York, and Rashan's was one of them. And I called the detective who had it before me, I said, hey, I'm looking to look into this case. And he says, he was retiring, but I'd have to meet Mom first. I said, of course, I'll meet Mom. He goes, no, mom has to approve that you're going to have her son's case. I said, okay. And I'll never forget, we met it was a Sunday morning, it was a weekend morning at a diner in downtown Brooklyn in Dumbo. And there he was. He brought Miss Brazelle, and I'll tell you, as a seasoned investigator, I was intimidated. I was nervous. I said, holy cow, this is like a job interview. And I'll never forget her sitting across from me. Tough Brooklyn mama. We're family today, but she said to me, she says, you have a problem if my son's gay, that my son was gay? Is that gonna hamper you investigating his case? I said, no, not at all. I said, I work for your son. I said, I answer to you, but I work for Rashan. And so I was hired. And it grew into a beautiful relationship. And I was able to tell mom, and she was the one who I told that we had found who had murdered her son.
Who you found?
Yeah, who actually had murdered the 17-year-old girl I mentioned earlier. And who knows who else. Guarantee there's more that we don't know about. But I'll never forget, we were driving to the grand jury, and they were going to testify. And we were in the car, and Miss Brazelle is sitting in the passenger seat, and Rashan's brother was in the back, and they asked me if I had ever found Rashan's head, and we hadn't. And it's crazy because at the time, that question didn't affect me at all. And I had told somebody that story, and they were like, dude, don't repeat that. That's crazy. I never thought how crazy that was because it was just so normal. It was such a normal conversation to have. But it's not. It's not a normal conversation to have. And that's just a small example on what becomes normalized in our careers. That is not so normal. And when we don't have answers to these struggles and stressors that we experience as cops, we don't feel that anybody else could possibly understand what we're going through.
I don't think people realize how difficult a job being a cop is. Because like every person you interact with is afraid of you, they're lying to you.
We're the bad guy?
You're the bad guy. They hate you just because you're in a uniform or because you have a badge.
But they'll call you if something happens.
Yeah.
It's
unfair, but it is the way it is.
And that's fine. We're not going to always be loved by everyone. And when I started my career, everyone loved us. This whole city loved us. The world loved us. I left, and what seemed like everybody hating us.
Things had changed over the years?
Well, I started my career in 2001, 9/11, and I left the height of the pandemic and defund the police and everybody hating us.
Why do you think all that changed? I mean, there were some cases that stood out, but...
Oh, yeah. I mean, you said it. There's certainly cases that stuck out, the ones that make the news. But there's so many that don't make the news. And it's easy to craft public perception around the salacious stories that sell, that you get viewers on, and you don't hear about the officers that do such wonderful things that come at a detriment to their own personal health and wellness and their family's health and wellness and the sacrifices they make. You don't hear about those. So yes, those stories that make the news definitely shape public perception and not always in a positive light.
Were there times where you doubted or questioned your decision to become a cop?
There were times I didn't want to be on the job anymore, sure. Definitely, I had those times. Most certainly when things were really bad in my marriage, it was maybe I need to leave. Maybe I need to find another profession. But it's tough. It's tough to not do what you love so much, even though it's causing damage to something else you love. But yes, there were plenty of times that I said, maybe I need to do something else. This is not my thing. I stuck with it though. I couldn't break away from it.
It gets dangerous sometimes too, I'm sure.
Yeah, I've never had to take a life. but there are plenty of situations where you got to put hands on people, and yes, definitely some difficult encounters.
Do you think society, the world, whatever, is getting better or worse?
Society as a whole, is it getting better or worse? I think it depends on where you choose to look, right? I love what you're doing with the soft white underbelly, in that you're looking at and you're focusing on and you're giving people a voice that society says shouldn't have a voice. For a long time, I questioned my faith on the job. Not so much today. Not at all today. And I look at, not to go off a religious, too religious on you, but Jesus' apostles were all downcast and outcasts of society, right? And that's who you've chosen to give a voice to, and I think that's a beautiful thing. There's some evil people in the world. I've seen them. I've interviewed them. I've been sitting right in front of them, and I've heard in vivid detail they're evil. But there are also people who are in a position where they're down on their luck and they're struggling, and it's not so much because of things that they did to create that. They might still that might be doing now, but that's not why it started for them. And to give them a voice, I think it's just a beautiful thing. So I think it depends on where you look. I think society will always have its ups and downs, its roller coaster, its ebbs and flows. But just remembering that we're all human, and I think you do that. I think you remind people that deep down we're all human, and if we forget that, we're going to be in a bad place.
It's helpful, I think, to be able to understand other people and how they can be different, how you have to factor in how they grew up, what the battles they faced when they were young.
We all entered this world as children, right? We didn't choose to be, evil, and things definitely create that situation. And yeah, I think the power of people's stories and listening, being more interested in somebody than interesting, listening more than speaking. Mm-hmm. And again, what you do in giving people a voice is that maybe there's somebody, my whole thing, maybe there's somebody out there, maybe there's a cop out there, it doesn't have to be a first responder, anybody that is struggling in whatever they might be struggling with, whatever they might be, whatever life hurdle they're facing, and they hear somebody else talk about theirs, no matter what it is, could give them a little bit of hope that, you know what, maybe I too can get past that. Maybe I'm not alone in my struggle. That's my hope.
Jason, what would you say was your what personality trait do you have that really helped you do your job? What's the strength that you had?
My wife would tell me, you would always say, we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out. You can't tell me that something can't be done. You can't tell me that something's impossible. And that's what I brought into all my investigations. Another human being can't take somebody's life and think that they're going to get away with it. It could go 20, 30, 40 years. I'm going to find you. And just the not giving up. And that character trait I didn't know how to use or wasn't aware that I could use that in my personal life. And it was, wait a minute. I don't have to destroy what I've worked so hard for, what my family's worked so hard for. Applying that not giving up to that aspect was what made all the difference. But my character trait, I think, would be the just...
Perseverance.
Perseverance.
That's a great one. One last question, Jason. What would you say is the most important thing you've learned in your life? How old are you now?
45.
45. What's the most important thing you've learned?
That's a great question. I I'd like to think I learned many things, but one of the most important, I think, is no matter what it might be that you're facing, that I faced, is if I give it to God, then I'm good. No matter what the outcome is, just if I do that more often, that it'll be all right.
Awesome. Jason, thank you so much for sharing your story.
You're welcome.
I wish you lots of luck.
Thank you.
Thanks, man.